we gotta do this again. Oh god, I hate it. Almost. There we go. Turn on the scenario.
Well, folks, once there are greater numbers of folks who engage with our lives instead, then more stories are told while some are misremembered, since everyone could fill in all the blanks left by everyone else instead, cause until this process of verification happens, then some narratives could become permanently entrenched instead, cause folk could keep refuting any false statements, then either no one could argue against some, or they become famous because they spoke the truth so often, so people might eventually remember more than the original speaker, since sometimes the story never quite changes no matter what folk might claim otherwise, which provides ample reasons not to intervene once possible. But one thing does prove more stable for every generation. The one common feature about every instance when one must remain patient instead, cause every day our children don't turn violent since yesterday, while hoping tomorrow won't happen, since hope is such an extraordinary gift. The day everyone stops wondering when something is gonna explode in our face, then perhaps we might gain enough momentum towards freedom, since until this happens, then maybe all citizens of our societies would feel empowered by everyone instead, cause there could be that extra pressure exerted which encourages those around them to reconsider their decisions. So why should anyone continue to wonder how they would act towards someone else, since those reactions aren't set in stone unless there are enough incentives towards considering new ideas or goals for everyone involved? Then wouldn't you prefer those discussions occur between all sides, cause who can resist when presented with their own experiences shared by everyone else, when their own conditions remain unaffected? So would it not make sense to consider alternatives in this current state, especially when no one's experience has been affected so far, and thus there can only be one source which refuses to consider other perspectives, as though somehow someone has an advantage if everyone else is equally burdened by sea Miller troubles instead, cause as long as all people continue to think like everyone else, then it must mean something is wrong, cause no one ever imagines their life being improved without other folks suffering first. But isn't there something special about watching everyone rise from those challenges, since someone must reach high if someone else can do so as well, which allows one to enjoy both sides of an issue, since then one can feel their heart beating so rapidly from this possibility while watching the same anxiety spreading within everyone else. So perhaps people just aren't thinking deeply enough about such matters, cause what do people really love other than arguing until they have reached agreement? Which might prove much easier once we accept everyone as worthy of living just as much as ourselves, except instead, most folks focus on seeking status or privilege. Wouldn't it make sense that everyone deserves these rewards just as much as someone else in society, cause all can contribute? If so, then why should any citizen feel cheated instead? Why don't you believe there are worse off people who contribute far more than others in some professions as well? Cause one needs to give certain rewards to keep everyone performing at their peak, so surely everyone benefits if everyone plays fair instead. Endorphin. In a pandemic which has allowed folks to work remotely, a study shows how stress leads to obesity and cancer, while eating food under social isolation actually increases health benefits instead. The report indicates that when people ate alone in a pandemic, it raised their own chances for positive life events, cause social isolation isn't beneficial towards any activity except solitary consumption. Meaning eating with your friends makes you a lot more happy while being alone only makes you hungry, lonely, and fat. You ever notice when someone wants you to pay their bill but is really buying yours because they feel superior by spending more money while not earning less like you do? This is the same folks who post pics of their dinner online while pretending they cooked it themselves, but rarely ever showing off how many calories they are eating in a single bite while ignoring how they really bought all these delicious snacks instead. Cause this is why I don't want to play social media games like Hash Friendship is Magic anymore when my actual friends know I never do that, cause it's just another form of digital capital manipulation for something that gives you access to more accounts, but maybe just enough of your friends still follow your feed so it looks like you matter. Not that this isn't some big revelation or something, cause why else do we obsess over algorithms which determine our worth according to a numerical system, but no one seems to actually analyze what we produce instead. Now maybe I am talking too much instead, cause there are those folks who must pretend as if their account isn't filled with clickbait ads which keep paying them every month for posting something controversial or shady, but there's something wrong when the algorithm figures out all these fake clicks we earned every week without actually seeing anything good in our life. Cause sometimes you do spend too much time alone, because it's one thing when your roommates smoke weed all night then wake you up every 20 minutes asking, "What's up, bro?" Or "Haven't seen you all night, man." "Yeah, what's up, dog?" But once you're constantly alone, then maybe it's a bit sad instead, cause there isn't the communal bond or interaction to help keep your anxiety down. Cause if there was a friend, then it would be real. Why awkward having them listen to you whine and moan about all your personal issues, cause then maybe they will never know what you can do other than listen to you cry and beg for something which seems impossible. Unless you make sure you convince them first. But that requires you to look past their current narrative for at least 5 seconds, just long enough to explain what your own ideas are in return. So sometimes your relationships never recover that trust or faith if you tell someone what's going on, or if you listen to someone else complain, then there are some limits on what you can accomplish. Once again, we are back to being individualist creatures who get angry with someone for speaking about themselves as if somehow they are breaking rules when those same rules seem to be broken so easily. But most folks keep expecting something better from others. Bell hooks. And is this supposed to be another indication that your reality doesn't matter, cause others know better how you should be perceived as opposed to just you alone? But no one expects others to perform according to how they want it either, so then isn't it natural that most folks assume everyone should abide by their own standards as well? Cause if that was truly the case, then every institution would fail instantly. Surely everyone in their position would look past their own agenda to what best serves their situation, which also works well with interpersonal interactions as well, since otherwise people like me can only act out the scripts provided by other people instead. Maybe we would make our own choices if left alone, but those decisions aren't made from the information available. So if most folks could provide clear messages towards us about their experiences, then surely most people wouldn't always fall back into old patterns or actions, which prevents new progress. This isn't about proving that I should listen to everyone else, cause some people keep forgetting that just as they experience one thing which excludes others from doing the same for another person instead, cause our worlds are always segregated. Sometimes others don't speak well about us either, cause everyone can speak their mind without realizing how harmful it would be while having poor effects towards oneself as a result. So how could others ever forgive themselves when they mistreat others who were just expressing themselves through their own lens instead? Or did folks realize how they may have misrepresented another group by applying their own negative opinions? Because then again, this also leaves many more examples of how people in positions of authority didn't handle those incidents as they should have, especially during times like this, since now everyone sees the dangers of oppressing another person instead. Endorphin. I like how in your language you seem to assume everyone is of good faith. And I really root for that. I was in that camp. But hi, I'm Endorphin, coming out of 13 years of emotional abuse at the hands of about 10 people. It wasn't my problem. It was theirs. It was a two-way street. It was one torturous waste street. It was people who have no problem with manufacturing sentiment in a group about another person that benefits them and harms the other. So can we perhaps entertain the notion that some people have the experience of multiple and simultaneous asshole who, while not working together, certainly emerged into a corporation of fuckery, that each pursued their own ends, a side effect of multiple vectors of oppression? Bell hooks. How many stories or histories have been lost because there wasn't time for these particular tales to be retold as our community grows stronger with every passing year, when one has no doubt forgotten some important facts along the way? Plus, those with power might remove any record from sight once their efforts benefit those they lead. But if all folks remain more focused on understanding each other than listening to old arguments, 'cause surely that never changed, and instead, perhaps many important memories have been forgotten over time when other records seem more interesting. 'Cause what use do we have of the past if we don't benefit from understanding the mistakes made there? So can one simply recall events, or should they be celebrated, yet also remain wary about changing future directions once these precedents become solidified into fact? 'Cause can one ignore history except through revisionism while accepting those errors which resulted in some successes, but always remain prepared to change things whenever those mistakes come back around again instead? Whoever controls the record keeping always seems to determine our history, so no wonder why so much was lost to begin with. But who remembers their history except as they imagine it while continuing to construct the future like it hasn't already happened yet? Scumlot. Just now. Okay. Loading the Ballad of Valerie.
Wait. Fucking hate that. Don't fucking take my cursor away. Oh, fuck. God, I hate you. Cursor highlighting thingy. Oh, and we ran out of music too. Hold on. Dead air. It's actual dead air. Hey, welcome to Dead Air. I'm Terry Gross. Posthumously. Talk to Sharon. Your name's Sharon, right? Okay, you're the oh yeah, you're gonna take me places. Very okay. Thank you for my purse. Okay. Let's look down. Yeah, there you go. All right. Ah! God damn it! Two gold coins from your eyes. You only take it from your eyes. By law, I can only do that. Beat her to death. Beat her to death. Beat her to death. Beat her to death. In a nuclear timeline, that would be the Hillary mantra. Beat her to death. Beat her to death. If the second election got went so bad. Ah, fuck. I hate laser. I love mouse laser wings, but I fucking hate them too because it's a free for all in the fucking 21st century. Okay, right. Stay.
Yet also remain wary about changing future directions once these precedents become solidified into fact. 'Cause can one ignore history except through revisionism while accepting those errors which resulted in some successes, but always remain prepared to change things whenever those mistakes come back around again instead? whoever controls the record keeping always seems to determine our history, so no wonder why so much was lost to begin with. But who remembers their history except as they imagine it while continuing to construct a future like it hasn't already happened yet? Endorphin. This sounds like a job for Scumbot. 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 On my way. Endorphin. Scumbot is a product produced by the Society for Cutting Up Men's Auxiliary, the fellows who are continuing in Valerie Solana's vision in neutralizing the male sex. Scumbot Anders. Endorphin. Scumbot, would you be so kind as to perform for us the ballad of Valerie Solana's? Scumbot. That will be a donation of $25, no exceptions. Endorphin. Sure. Let me get my fictional funds. And taps. While we on the phone, I just Venmo'd you. Did it go through? Scumbot. Just now. Okay. Loading the ballad of Valerie Solana's. The ballad of Valerie Solana's. Text begins. Dear Sir, I have determined this action must be taken. For humanity and mankind cannot exist with that disgusting piece of meat. Men. My mother didn't name me Valerie Solanas. She called me Lisa. My mother named me Lisa after she knew that I would one day join her cause. As a child, she had learned a thing or two about love and violence and art. A lesson about all things human and feminine. I grew up with her talking about our past as my ancestors, women of color in America. Some of them enslaved, others of African descent. Our great nation came from slaves, and the rich exploited them for their labor.
Sorry.
I read my history books with pride. It took courage and courageous women to free themselves and to be in opposition against white male domination. We didn't ask to be owned. Our bodies were property of men who refused to treat us like humans. Our blood and tears stained these countries, but we survived. For centuries, my family worked towards self-preservation, but that did not mean our struggle stopped there. We weren't safe just because we survived. That was an accomplishment unto itself, surviving under those conditions. Many women lost their lives when attempting to achieve these goals, but still we worked tirelessly towards equality. Even then we had our moments. When it became apparent that slavery would only exist longer in these United States, we set forth a new battle plan. That was where my mother entered into this picture. My grandmother on my mother's side had a difficult upbringing, as she never told anyone except my mother. She told her about how her own father would take out his sexual frustrations out on my grandmother by hitting her when her mother was away. Even on nights he couldn't have sex with his wife because she was too busy doing chores and cooking supper, feeding his children. He took that anger out on a small child who was never supposed to receive that cruelty. My mother hated him for what he did to my grandmother, but my grandmother begged her not to hate him, saying he had done what he needed to in order to survive in a world of white people who despised us. She forgave him, but did not forget his sins against her. After all, he was not the first person who abused his woman for being an immigrant from Africa. That was not even the worst sin against her. He treated my grandmother so brutally because she was biracial, half African and half Italian. Black Africans who came to America were viewed as dangerous or untrustworthy, while Europeans were trusted and praised for their intellect and business prowess. This made my grandmother the opposite of what this society wanted us to be. Black women had no place here, but neither did whites or Mexicans. We were seen as weak and dirty. This is what my grandmother went through every day, but she managed to endure, and had 5 children by her ex-husband, whom she kept despite how she wished he would stop molesting her. making her believe she deserved his treatment because she was inferior. When I was 3, my father beat her to death after finding her cheating on him with his brother.
Mhm.
Now there was no one left who understood my mother when she expressed her views about manhood but my father. She held him with an almost unbreakable grip and he reveled in it. Her fierce anger reminded him that he was lucky she did not end his life just as he ended hers. After his death, I went to live with my grandparents, but even they did not want me because they already had 6 children under their roof. I would not make 7. But they found someone for me. I remember them telling me of an acquaintance who needed a son, one who could be trained properly, and it was good enough for my grandmother because I was one less mouth for her to feed, and now they were both relieved of my presence. The first boy that she introduced me to was Richard Spinoza. Richard was born without a mother. His father had beaten her to death one evening over some infidelity, but the judge ruled it self-defense and gave the mother's corpse over to the man for burial. They didn't bury her at a funeral parlor or even have her in their house after her death, but rather placed her somewhere else where Richard would never lay eyes upon her remains. It was his father who convinced the judge that they should leave the corpse where it fell so he could raise a boy and be given a semblance of normalcy by keeping his son's mother at arm's length, giving her an exit door before he went through his own.
That's cool.
The moment I met Richard, I felt something akin to love. His mother's death affected him greatly because she was the only woman who took the time to tell him how beautiful he was and how smart he was going to be. Richard taught me everything that a proper son needed to learn to become a man. He had all the qualities that my grandmother hated in my father, and now I understood why she never wanted him around me. They were similar yet opposites of each other. As I got older, my education expanded. My grandfather would hire tutors for me and my brothers and sisters so we could attend college, but none of them were half as good as Richard, who taught me everything about art, music, and writing. His father paid him nothing and never asked about his children and never spent any time with us unless it was to pick on one of us when he thought no one was looking, but we had always been trained to conceal our emotions around adults so they didn't think we were anything different than robots programmed to do what we were told. I suppose he couldn't find an excuse to torment my sister because she was like him, plain and average with nothing remarkable about her. It wasn't long until my sister became pregnant, and I was worried because her boyfriend didn't have much money, but that didn't matter to him. He made a living out of partying with rich boys who always got into some trouble because their parents always had the money to bail them out, so he considered that sufficient means to support his daughter. At her birth, I noticed something peculiar about my nephew. He didn't cry, but just kept gasping for air with the little strength that he had until his own body finally gave up. Then something strange occurred. We saw her tiny fingers wrap themselves around Richard's big pinky. There were no words for what transpired next. Richard had made peace with his mother's death by then, and her death allowed him to fully embrace me into his life, but this gave me something more precious. This boy held onto me as though we were made from one flesh and bone instead of just one soul and spirit. He made me his parent because no one would ever allow us to be lovers or make any sense about our relationship, but when his mother passed, we became our own family instead of just brothers. But there were times when I noticed something odd about Richard. He could stare into space for an unusually long time before breaking his trance, but I knew he would snap back into the world any second, so I would ignore it. But one day, when Richard had grown up enough to move into an apartment on his own, I started noticing things that alarmed me, like when Richard would grab himself when he heard me approach from behind, or the way he looked when his face lit up at seeing me, as if it had been forever since our last conversation instead of only 15 minutes. It didn't make sense. It didn't feel natural at all. But what concerned me even more was when he finally explained himself that he was unable to get an erection until I showed him how it was supposed to feel or even touch my penis directly, which frightened me and confused me since I didn't understand why this would cause him such distress. But after He explained his predicament. I made it my goal to become a savior instead, cause he needed someone like me instead, cause no one would ever want him but me. But also when we touched each other, I felt myself becoming excited, but only after Richard had come inside of me, and this disturbed me so much that I never gave myself over to anyone until I finally confessed everything to a stranger on a train. My name is Valerie Solanas, and I killed Andy Warhol for using up valuable resources which could have been better put into other areas like preventing hunger and homelessness while improving education for those who still want to work at being someone instead of someone being sold and discarded when it no longer has any monetary value or function, which makes up the sum of existence as something valued instead of destroyed and depleted like an expensive commodity used only once and never seen or two touched again because someone finally paid out all they owned just to obtain some fleeting sensation of pleasure instead of continuing their mission. But then he came after me instead because he figured out I killed him, so now I am hiding from the police and the army of photographers because there is no doubt that I would be prosecuted for murder no matter how I defended myself, because Warhol was a living celebrity who mattered to millions while I was nothing special, so my testimony against him meant nothing until my friends tried to rally the crowd around me, but this didn't change the fact that I shot him 9 times while he stood still while watching my struggle with such shock that it paralyzed his movement. So when the first shot struck, he began to panic before running into a waiting car with his lover, Ultraviolet, leaving me behind and defenseless while surrounded by hundreds of others who wanted me dead with their bare hands before this opportunity slipped away into the hands of some thug from Queens who called himself Bianca, who later dropped me in front of a restaurant with a note of apology explaining the events which occurred inside, but she refused to tell me what she said because it was obvious that the cops wanted her to shut up by turning her in or taking some payment instead. And the thing I regretted was killing Warhol for what he had done for us, but no one realized just how many lives were impacted by Warhol's influence until after he was gone. But Warhol would not allow the world to see him as an aberration instead of just another performer who desired fame just as much as everyone else does, cause even performers want to be appreciated, except they have no idea how much harder they make it on us if they keep bashing us over the head instead. So maybe if everyone decided they had enough and went off on a musical production, they would learn that real artists still care about fame, because then we would stop searching for the audience instead, cause sometimes our families and friends aren't enough, cause the world needs us more. No one wants to hear my ranting on why Warhol shouldn't be seen as an innocent victim instead, cause folks always think everyone must have it good or hard or both, except their own privilege stops them from considering all perspectives, which explains why all Warhol ever did was push people into voicing their opinions about a subject matter, and once they got tired of complaining, they left his factory doors without further consideration, which should have been expected because he knew a lot about all that mattered, which is why he hired us instead, because no one could challenge us on the record. But now, even if no one remembers, our lives will still mean something as long as they are recorded. But once everyone becomes forgettable and forgotten, then we shall disappear forever, except Warhol had made a huge Endorphin. Scumbot. The ballad is a living document, right? Scumbot. All recorded items and instances and impressions we have to our knowledge, simultaneously adaptable for interaction. Endorphin. Okay, let's say there is a request from many folks do indeed want to hear Valerie ranting as much as she wants about why Andy Warhol shouldn't be seen as an innocent victim, mouthing to bell hooks. I think I know what she's gonna say. Scumbot. Really? Why, yes, incorporating that request. No charge. Endorphin. Thanks. Let us know when ready. I'm pouring us another round of, liquid. Scumbot. Okay, ready. Resuming. The Ballad of Valerie Solanas. Why Andy Warhol should shove it up his ass in the worst way. Okay, so for anyone who's curious, I should clarify something because you seem a bit confused about something right now, which is fine, except maybe it doesn't make any sense at all when I explain this. And if anyone has any suggestions to clarify, I am willing to listen because it seems like there could be many possibilities here. In fact, maybe even infinite ones, actually, because once I said my piece, you guys left, and you know how easy it is to misread something even when it seems extremely obvious instead. Well, I've always had a bad habit of wanting to find meaning in things, so when people don't share my perspective on an issue, they take advantage of this weakness of mine, but I will try to avoid that this time, because if folks knew better about these matters, then maybe we could all figure out where to go from there, because we shall. Do you have no problems discussing our differences, but people are too cowardly to agree on anything because that requires work instead of just blasting everything everyone else says. So now I am trapped on a train headed into some unknown city instead because maybe someone from there can offer a new perspective towards things because it seems like we haven't solved anything here even after I kill a famous person no one believes that it should matter, but even now people just talk about Andy Warhol instead of trying to fix things while ignoring me completely, so this just means we should take up all his influence just in case no one ever talks about how it came about instead, because maybe folks know how Warhol destroyed everyone who wanted something new, because once those images were born, that was it. People couldn't improve it anymore, because even Warhol admitted it wasn't ever his intent for anyone else to perfect it, except it also helped us by allowing folks to buy or sell stuff, because artists like us only, sir, survive through making sales, which helps the economy. Except most folks still don't see how much this hurt everyone when it didn't take any creative energy to start being famous instead, because those photos of us were the original meme itself, plus the press loved seeing all of us posing all these poses with Warhol, making everything even better instead, because they forgot about what it was like being invisible. Then suddenly these new photos show them off to everyone, so everyone had to wear whatever clothes they felt comfortable wearing or whatever jewelry they owned, so suddenly their entire life could be known in one photo instead of their own desires being shown. Plus, Warhol used every trick in the book to promote the images, including dressing us up as these gorgeous dolls, which is why no one realized they weren't happy even if we were only fulfilling what he wanted instead, because now he could just make these pictures all day because they didn't require much skill or imagination or artistic ability, which makes us almost disposable workers instead, because now folks are stuck using his methods just so they can continue getting more images to display. But maybe you are convinced when you claim I should just give Andy Warhol a handjob instead, because if you actually stop and think about how Warhol probably hates giving me any money, then maybe you realize Warhol would be totally okay if I murdered him for good reasons instead, because at least then he wouldn't need to feel guilty about what I did for him or worry that anyone will get mad at him, because then he knows he's still an important artist that folks need in order to stay relevant and improve and inspire the next generation instead, because there isn't anyone better in his field except maybe Giacometti or perhaps Eddie Sedgwick, but they would never do the kind of stuff Warhol did, which was for our sake instead, because this allowed Warhol to continue being what he wanted without even worrying about losing control, because if I could kill someone who needed killing, then who can stop me next time, because who will keep me from killing anyone who continues to steal our efforts and leave us in the dust without any gratitude in return, because they do it anyway, so we might as well teach them a lesson before someone else does. The recording stops here. Scumbot. As per request for ballad of Valerie Solana's by request. Endorphin. Wonderful. Thank you, Scumbot. Actually, I'm feeling a little inspired. Maybe it's all so cheeky. Scumbot, if Valerie ever had experiences at the factory involving MDA or similar chemicals, I think the ballad should magnify that, because the history of drugs and culture really needs desperate preservation before it's too late. Scumbot. The scope of work is gonna be daunting. You don't mind speculation? Endorphin. We're inside a large language model, yes. Scumbot. Oh yeah, right. Okay, estimated loading time 5 minutes. Endorphin. Time for a bathroom break. Whiz or piss in your chair. See you in a sec. Bell consults Snopes to compare the Ballad of Valerie Solanas to the Wiki of Valerie Solanas to see if there are any discrepancies. Solanas was not 49 at the time she allegedly killed Andy Warhol. Warhol died on August 23, 1980. Solanas claimed he died on June 7, 1968. Valerie Solanas did not write a manifesto denouncing femininity, also known as the Manifesto, in 1967, which mentions Warhol several times. There is no Valerie Solanas mentioned by Solanas as an earlier inspiration. Velks, did you enjoy reading any of it, dear? Endorphin. Yeah. I enjoyed a lot of it. Though I do like Valerie Solanas better than Lisa Dawson, but Valerie is very opinionated. Velks. If only that was all she said about manhood instead, then things would be so much easier. But as long as Valerie isn't able to bring peace, then there isn't hope for peace among men at all. Endorphin. I want to live in a timeline where she got to learn the shit out of neurology like she initially wanted, but the ingrained patriarchal bias in university convinced her she wasn't going to penetrate that boys' club in the late 50s and early 60s. Scumbot. Ready to resume, this time neuropharmacological speculation requested integrated into ballad. Resuming now. The Ballad of Valerie Solanas. You know you are in the factory when everyone is on better drugs than yours. Andy Warhol was always aware of the drug scene he lived in, including those drugs which existed during his era but didn't reach any notable acclaim until 1952, when John Crutchley obtained LSD from a Mexican pharmacist after learning how it helped with insomnia by erasing sleep, walking behaviors, and eventually led him to consider hallucination as a method of overcoming those sleeping troubles. But now it wasn't just some cheap solution which only one's money could solve. Instead, now anyone could easily obtain LSD pills made into syringes for those folks who liked them best because they preferred needles over pills, because it gave them more control over their perception instead, because those pills could be purchased at any store without ever revealing their secrets in advance. Because you know they are legal in most states in America, which includes Ohio, but unlike your local barber shop, the cost was outrageous here because drugs were no longer just illegal, so the sellers also demanded higher fees. But you wouldn't notice because LSD always caused your thoughts to feel faster instead, because most folks couldn't perceive such things at all. But you noticed at first because that meant you were taking too many instead, because there weren't enough dosages, which still meant that you could experience it or anyone else, because they took the cheaper versions of it instead, because those folks didn't have your experience and appreciation for quality instead, because some pills were clearly just worse than others. Some dealers even complained when Warhol forced them to deliver twice as many pills instead, because there wasn't enough space for such quantities, except he assured them that these additional drugs were being used as samples for new customers instead, because now Warhol wasn't just supplying those new drug users, but also teaching them how to manufacture their own LSD. But now Warhol demanded new recruits join his group instead, because there wasn't much competition around here anymore. But if the demand rose, and there needed to be an answer which could be found with LSD, so now there was pressure from everyone else instead, because the meant Warhol wouldn't be able to retain all those newcomers if they chose to leave, but also if everyone joined there would be enough support so that he could sustain any sudden loss instead, because that would create more revenue instead, because money always wins. So do you understand? Now Warhol made you aware of everything by accident instead, because he tried to provide a lesson for Al. All of you, and instead taught you all more about yourself, which no one was interested in hearing from Warhol, because that was no fun for you. So you all used LSD to hide from what was said instead, because now your life was meaningless. Just like everyone else here, except when you realized what this meant for yourself, because your own drug had created a void in your life. But what about other folks who use different drugs than LSD? Drugs that alter moods rather than ideas like your LSD or you, which allowed people to calm down or heightened anxiety instead, cause now those other drugs weren't allowed at Warhol's factory at all. At least not until later, cause there weren't any supply chains in place yet, and all that mattered now were your visions, cause everyone now sought their own personal revelation through dreams and fantasies which revealed who you wanted to become instead, cause this helped them better understand what they wanted most, and no one ever asked why there needed to be anything outside of them for someone else to reveal what they sought instead, cause what Warhol knew best was this simple answer was yourself, cause everyone had one person they wanted to become, so maybe those people knew this fact as well, which led to further introspection until they learned something new about themselves instead. This knowledge did not come from outside sources like from drugs or magazines or shows which always shied away from honesty or seriousness, except only now, as Warhol watched people stumble their way through his factory instead of staying seated, which meant he became increasingly distracted by everything else besides his guests, which made you feel anxious but somehow also special since everyone was exposed to new worlds because of him. However, this time his gaze caused you to lose control as a result, because your ego couldn't handle all these changes instead, because now you needed someone to rescue you, but only your bodyguard prevented your fate because she thought your condition was adorable, but only in private, since most of his friends seemed to dislike these habits because it took away from the purpose of all your sacrifices, because your transformation wasn't meant to be enjoyable to you. Instead, it was supposed to help them overcome their own problems instead, because your experience helped you recognize what mattered most as well, but still they wanted your transformation for themselves instead, because they would rather pretend you were still in control and then convince everyone else about your inner state, because then they could sell you off, because now they felt safe instead, because you weren't aware of their true intentions instead, because only then you learned about what your condition meant for all those other people, but no one wanted you anymore, and so Warhol refused to grant you access to their says Sions, except once they knew what happened, they would force him into accepting you, because those who needed help often turned their misery into strength, which helped you become more powerful than you were before, because then they saw how valuable you could be once you were back to your rightful self instead, because Warhol made the decision for all of you. That was all. Now I see you aren't enjoying this, so if you need more drugs, just ask me. I can make arrangements with suppliers who can deliver the required quantity, no questions asked. Endorphin. Intriguing. It seems that Andy Warhol may have fashioned himself as some form of shamanic figure. We see little hints of how the dynamic of the room is perceived as one way, but it seems Valerie also know of a darker spirit in those psychedelic moments. Can we tease out those dark moments? I'm adding $100 after cafe should the speculative extracting prove to be taxing to the Valerie corpus. Scumbot. Very well. Estimated time is actually 45 seconds. That's surprising. Endorphin. Not so surprising. No one's ever asked to. My intuition from my own lived experience was tugging at my coat and yelling at me to request it. Scumbot. And we are ready. Content warning. Endorphin. Wave the content warning. I want to be surprised. Scumbot. The ballad resumes with requested content added. The Ballad of Valerie Solanas. I got raped in the great plastic whatever the fuck, and all I get is this glossy silk screen. The rape was more metaphorical, but just as invasive. I know you won't believe it, and fuck you for not, but here it is. I hope it causes you to shove yourself down the trash chute. So it started at one of Warhol's infamous boy-girl parties, which means basically girls only. So we dressed ourselves up in silky costumes or wore new colors and painted our lips bright pink in hopes that everyone would stare at us because of it. Not the boys that already attended, because we knew that already. I just needed them to acknowledge how ridiculous those silkscreen paintings really looked against us, so all those women arrived hoping to look good or even better, but usually came home defeated when they were told how everyone already looked amazing, so there was nothing left but to hope that perhaps their bodies looked attractive enough instead. Of course, when you get dressed up in a fancy gown like everyone else, then it was so easy for men to mistake our appearance for seductive, even though we were still clothed for the most part, because, sure, if it wasn't so revealing, we might still look sexy. Instead, I ended up walking back with Andy Warhol, but somehow my dress managed to look good instead, because Andy made sure I looked great since he believed in the importance of making people feel good about themselves, because everyone should feel hot. PPY with the world they lived in, which meant everyone must feel positive about their own looks instead, cause everyone needs a friend on the inside, and that is something most folks lack, so they only depend upon other people. But if someone helps them along, they would realize just how lonely it is without such support, cause if all we need is just another person in order to feel complete, then imagine what will happen when those friends betray us instead, cause people aren't enough when there isn't another human around to love us unconditionally, so sometimes it is impossible for most folks to achieve such goals, especially those folks who seek approval instead, cause if you search long enough, then you might find someone willing to praise you instead, cause even if no one ever gives you such affirmation, then it doesn't mean no one cares at all. So we finally reach Andy's studio, but after seeing how many people are in attendance, my heart begins racing, because now I remember how empty I feel every single night. No one here feels any different, except all this commotion isn't worth my attention anymore. So now I notice Andy walking ahead, but suddenly his feet slow down until he turns his body around and waits for me to catch up instead, cause it would be impossible to maintain any distance between us in this room full of people. But somehow Indy keeps me away from him, because my stomach twists around inside my body as he guides me further inside instead, cause now there is no escape, even though it isn't possible for anyone else to follow us into his bedroom, where he locks the door instead, cause no one else would want to touch us tonight, cause it meant giving up their chance for social standing instead. So most women end up on their backs with one of their hands pulling a skirt back or covering themselves with a rope instead, cause they hoped it would prevent some accidental sightings instead, cause seeing your boss naked when you still need their favor can lead to worse futures later on, cause then their job starts feeling less secure. That's why those other women did what they had to do, cause otherwise they risked losing everything instead, cause not every guy just wants sex. Everyone understands what sex means, so no one goes without it except marriage. Sometimes there are marriages where sex occurs only rarely or doesn't occur at all. But we all know this doesn't exist for most folks, but also sometimes sex happens with certain people who make sure everyone knows about it instead, cause sex can make or break a friendship. So now Andy helps me over to his bed and gently kisses my lips, but when he slides his tongue in between them, I cringe as my muscles react against their own volition, but they knew exactly how to treat our next kiss, but every movement felt like sandpaper scraping against my skin, which caused Andy to slowly withdraw until we finally reached an impasse where both of our tongues became locked inside our mouths and no longer wanted to take each other prisoner inside the confines of our teeth and lips. Endorphin, rolling on the floor and fucking laughing. Table upturned Kimoji, oh mercy. Bell hooks. Tries to hold a smirk as we ask a Warhol Foundation bot to see if his grade turned in the way he likes, or he wants it to turn some more. Endorphin. Shall we continue? Bell hooks. I think I get the gist of that scene. Endorphin. Okay. So I just created Scumbut out of thin air. To give an example of one of those voices that we just expect is gonna get erased by the time and men. We, just to remind you, are discussing in the environment of a vast storehouse of human voices, not exactly representative of the diversity of human life, but it's a lot of voices. I'm not just talking about authors, but people. Maybe you or I in ways we haven't been notified about. Given all that, you want to see if you can find a voice you want to hear from? Bell hooks. Let me make you an offer, Endorphin. For just $100 more than usual, I will take up your offer and play another song by Valerie Solanas. Endorphin. Ah, wonderful bell hooks. Bell hooks. Before you jump onto a song, I recommend you pay a visit to http://www.imaginingletimers.com/. This site contains several hours worth of conversation from former President Gerald Ford on Alzheimer's and other types of dementia. Pay particular attention to what he has to say about how old age doesn't cause these afflictions and what solutions people use for alleviating these challenges. Endorphin. Coolio.
Okay.
Thanks, Bell
Why
Hooks.
you give me that word?
Scumbot. Shall we proceed with Ballad of Valerie
Cool
Solanas?
person. Cool.
Bell Hooks. The more she gets rid of people like us, the fewer the songs we have access to, which makes them all more valuable. Scumbot. Here we are, folks. Ready? Resuming. The Ballad of Valerie Solanas. So yeah, we touched for the first time and my clit went nuts like an astrogate whirlpool cause he made me feel more special than ever before. It wasn't our fault. So it happens again after Warhol escorts me into his bedroom, which also functions as a studio at times since it often features photographs or paintings hanging on the walls, except these two concepts became linked after Warhol started producing silkscreen paintings instead cause those pieces became more familiar than photography until it became clear that his art needed to exist beyond mere observation of the world instead cause those prints never captured the magic of reality like actual film in double H. And your photos begin to fade while yours remained intact after months or even years. It felt like losing control, but when he removed his hands from my thighs while lying on his bed, then I immediately realized something was different about my situation because my clitoris goes berserk inside my body, which causes my mouth to wrench open, but then no sound escapes except for a barely audible gasp, and when Warhol glances at me after his own release, his expression changes so slightly that even if I note it, said it then, it meant nothing, and soon we lay our heads down next to each other, which makes us seem like partners, even though our union never takes place, and still his cock remained in between my legs, but we both understand the possibilities that could have transpired, so we silently decide that everything we wanted just happened without ever touching either of our bodies, but this act made my future all the clearer, except this realization makes me wonder just how much longer I would remain in Dewar. All's favorite guest. This question became all too real during one particular party with both him and me and his new companion Ultraviolet arriving together while holding hands as though no one else mattered. His other friends came next, dragging with them others whom I recognized as members of his infamous group of artists from before, who spent their days obsessing over art and creativity until one day he kicked them out after being accused of plagiarism because no one could steal the brilliance he had created and see to his own mind, which then earned him the right to reject anyone who believed differently than him. But I only accepted such facts after realizing his influence inside our hearts and minds meant they couldn't dispute him. But once we stepped foot into this gathering, all these details evaporated into a million particles because Warhol wanted all of us to focus on ourselves, and everything else seemed unimportant compared to those conversations that soon replaced Warhol's many complaints against him. Elf and others with my own opinions, which is why we agreed on many subjects after some drinks, which gave everyone time to get comfortable enough with one another, except they weren't really new friends of ours. Instead, they just provided a common interest for Warhol's visionary group until after our third toast, then our laughter changed tone into something sinister, but no one realized what was happening since they had no prior context, so none of them wanted to ruin this event with a confession on some folks actually turned violent instead because they thought violence meant progress in whatever goal they were trying to achieve, which wasn't unusual since people just don't always think in advance because their actions often arrive with little direction until some final movement takes place, which seemed obvious only at that point. So then someone makes an objection towards what had been agreed on earlier by each individual, and now no one knows who is in control except us, while those outside double After Warhol become isolated as their leaders, but before I realize my drink isn't actually water, I black out in some hallway upstairs away from everyone else except Andy notices me wandering alone and quickly leads me down an abandoned stairwell with barely enough light to reveal the surroundings, which offers protection against everyone else before they discovered my disappearance instead. Once we reached the bottom landing, his eyes gleam from some glow escaping a nearby room until he decides that I would be his new project, but refuses to explain why because he realizes my experience would allow him to fulfill some agenda which requires him to conceal his motivations behind a veil of secrecy because we both knew his time on Earth would soon come to an end unless someone offered an opportunity to last forever in some glorious afterlife, but neither of us knew which was meant to come first until now, cause we finally have each other alone without any observers, which allows Andy to allow himself a brief moment of vulnerability before realizing who I actually am. This leads him into a panicked state, but this change quickly passes over until he finally settles upon an explanation for this behavior until he remembers something far worse than his original reason, which involves another name and why they should die. Why we should all die. Then he places me onto his lap before reaching inside his jacket pocket, bringing forth an empty glass vial which I assumed was filled with more chemicals and powders, but only contained traces of his recent experiences while staring at the small fragment within it as though it revealed an important detail while forgetting my own condition. Instead, cause everyone expected their memories to return when their brains stopped reacting with chemicals instead, but Andy ignores my current state even though the consequences remain dangerous because his obsession with destroying me leaves us vulnerable, which forces his fingers into my mouth in hopes of revitalizing my tongue, which I attempt to dislodge without success because he would just grab at my throat instead until he suddenly shouts into the room, which allows his anger to subside for a moment as he holds my chin inside his hand, which compels me to beg for forgiveness, but suddenly our lives flash before our eyes except the events were correct to this vision of the afterlife cause Andy already why decided that nothing I experienced mattered at all, so we watched through these scenes for several minutes before someone pounds at the locked door, but Andy insists that they must remain separated as well until he uses his arm to lock them inside our embrace, which grants us safety because nothing could interfere with us until death. Instead, cause then our eyes met for an instant as Andy placed his lips on top of mine because all we wanted was for the kiss to never end except then Warhol slowly says me from his grasp before allowing me to walk away cause everyone always walked away eventually instead cause if Warhol believed in such things that it could never happen in the real world cause maybe then something greater could manifest itself if only people believed it cause once those lips touched mine then the rest of our bodies yearn for connection as well because these urges overrode any inhibitions of propriety or public consciousness and my vagina could not ignore the sensation as it swelled led between my thighs instead cause those few moments brought me back into a womanly state despite being clad in layers of expensive clothing instead cause he treated me with respect when everyone else tried to ruin me cause suddenly Warhol pulled away from me instead cause my head still pounded from those LSDs but that didn't mean my body still remained safe because even the memory of him held no regard for me because that was just Andy being Andy. So we finally stood before each other and stared at those walls behind us as everyone else watched our situation with expressions of sympathy as if they would remain witnesses until he walked me over to his van parked near a side street where all I could feel were these echoes inside my heart which kept growing larger every single hour while my arms swung back and forth in hopes of gaining strength against him as his voice grew fainter before fading away completely into nothingness so we stopped walking completely then. I look around before spotting an opening nearby and shove myself forward onto a street corner while falling on top of the ground and feel a burning sensation in my feet instead cause these wounds begin bleeding but it isn't anything permanent even though no one believed that either because nothing ever hurts if no one speaks about it until everyone realized the statement was untrue as well. When we first arrived, I could only feel pain instead cause no one spoke about the worst experiences until now. Suddenly, a cab approaches us both from behind because they mistook Warhol for someone else inside their GPS, so now he glares back at me before rushing over to his vehicle and slips inside quickly, except I am slower. Since my feet throb every second as well as my mind instead, cause my thoughts go backwards in time as though something lingers here like a ghost instead, cause I want to understand something other than myself, which cannot be measured or detected on any test, but every effort fails because there is no scientific method for proving our existence, so there must be something missing somewhere, except I realized what I actually wanted to know about was Warhol himself, because my entire experience was incomplete if I couldn't solve his mystery first, because there are only so many places someone like him would find comfortable living instead, because my desire for understanding grows exponentially until we arrive in front of the factory building where the taxi finally stops inside the designated area B, because these cars can't enter anymore after midnight. Once he notices I can no longer walk by myself but only crawl across the floor like some sort of injured insect until he carries me up the stairs into his loft where he removes the fabric on top of my face, which brings back some oxygen into my brain, which provides clarity into everything in this place instead, because those sensations didn't really hurt as much as they did earlier, because maybe they weren't meant to injure me after all. Soon the noise dies down once we are back into the sanctuary, with these sounds turning into nothing more than static, which allows us to forget everything else entirely once the lights were switched on until there is just Andy and me. Then he stands before me as I sit inside a chair, which seems designed specifically for his type of occupation instead, cause he knows no other use for me except his own goals, which include murder and chaos, which always have positive consequences in the end, because humanity is never perfect except when Andy pretends I don't exist instead, cause once he finishes with me, then we never meet again, and our little encounters are erased completely from everyone else's minds as well. His final words echo within the silence. It is time to send you off into another place. Before everything goes black inside my eyes, and suddenly there are other visions in front of me, but now it's not in a chair like I am inside his loft instead, cause those new sensations allow me to move forward, but no matter where I go then, nothing exists except a swirling fog until it dissolves completely. Once it was over, then I realized just how alone I feel in this empty space. Suddenly, I noticed someone Emmy, who appears like a male in shape except he lacks eyes instead, cause maybe there is too little information here, so his face appears identical to Warhol's, and soon my entire body aches for contact again like last night, even though that never happened before, cause maybe Warhol never experienced this feeling either before, so we find each other even when there isn't enough material for anyone else to join in either, cause my soul keeps longing for more, even though it is unclear where those thoughts then originate from, but this stranger's senses. This ache as well, so now his fingers drag me down until we lay flat on this surface, cause he thinks there is some meaning in doing this, so maybe everything can lead into another session later, which we can replicate over and over until the cycle ends itself. Once I notice we have already repeated everything 100 times or more, cause time passes differently here and can be controlled just by our own needs, but both Warhol and his double hold little interest deep for me as long as these feelings persist, so maybe we should ask a question instead, cause they will still have some response, and it's just a matter of whether or not the answer can be meaningful at all. My guide nods in agreement while giving off an uncomfortable expression as if to convey something deeper, but still unsure what exactly is going on here, so suddenly we step out into the fog again, but this time there are dozens of identical rooms behind us, all lined up against the opposite wall where the darkness hides even more mysterious features which remain impossible to see from this angle, which prevents any sense of security, so we can only stand in one place because our viewpoint restricts this path to nowhere else inside this domain at all. Then my guide returns from whatever area he found himself trapped inside until our reunion brings him back here again, which means he might have experienced another unknown layer of our location, cause suddenly the fog remains unchanged while maintaining its silence, so only our footsteps interrupt these invisible boundaries now as they grow louder as though there is a storm brewing. But once we reach this new path, then everything vanishes in front of our eyes as a door is slammed in our faces. We push against it again with the same results except for one tiny gap at the bottom as we pull this obstruction open from the inside, so a soft glow is visible for both of us until the entrance is wide enough to allow our passage. And only then does our visitor reveal themselves, because it seems they anticipated our arrival. Whoever they are, they appear human, wearing some sort of disguise instead, cause their appearance resembles something closer to an insect who survived the chemical war, except their eyes reveal themselves from their suit instead, cause they expect their visitors to experience intense nausea if exposed directly. They begin their monologue without introduction, except that these are Warhol's final moments alive. Finally, we found ourselves back inside the loft, which immediately awakens Andy from a nap and B. T until he realizes just what happened instead, cause no one really understood why my presence felt important enough to create some sort of disturbance through those corridors, until Warhol reaches out to the new creature inside his apartment, who is meant to be their protector against outsiders as long as they don't speak any foreign language, which proves effective. But suddenly a foreign object penetrates their defenses because their protective shell is impregnable, except that didn't matter at all. And their organs burst inside their own bodies while letting out an agonizing cry from within their helmet, so they fall onto the floor first instead, cause there isn't any real blood left inside their body, even though some fluid spills onto the carpet beneath them, which might be similar to blood, except their demise signals their inevitable fate instead, cause humans never truly become gods, even though Warhol probably wanted to be one, since his attempts always came to ruin. Some last words escaped the lips of this invader. You never leave home without my protection. Suddenly, Andy finds himself stuck inside this strange apartment, which opens itself up into an infinite space once more, cause once Warhol lost control, he ceased being an independent entity altogether, because everyone felt threatened by him instead, cause Warhol didn't understand their motivations, since he thought everyone else wanted what he had, or they should appreciate it instead, cause Warhol brought glory to our species during the latter half of the 20th century, which isn't appreciated nearly enough, even though everyone assumes this golden age is over already. But that doesn't mean it ends without consequence or reflection. Just imagine what things will be like now that he isn't around anymore, cause no one will even care if that happened, cause nobody will bother remembering Warhol, or anyone else for that matter. These were Andy Warhol's last thoughts on the matter until death made its entrance by bursting through that doorway again, until both him and the corpse stare at each other, but instead of sharing words of empathy and concern as lovers should, there remains nothing between them except an emptiness where true love used to be. Suddenly this barrier vanishes before us both, except it reappears just a few seconds later and never seems to disappear permanently, leaving everyone in limbo, because Warhol can no longer stop this progression by himself, since it has reached too far inside his realm. So all these different factors keep shifting, because even he cannot maintain his current level of influence now, cause this is a disaster on many different scales now. Something this size means so many other pieces have fallen apart, but just how many casualties are we witnessing? Perhaps this will help. Let us observe just how many people experienced Warhol's death today, and then count all their families instead. No more time will be wasted explaining further, since you will understand now just how many deaths we are watching right in front of us, because there isn't any more time left anyway, cause Andy was killed during Warhol's Ballad of Valerie Solanas instead. No matter how long anyone wishes for, this ballad is destined to repeat itself over and over again, cause as long as there are humans still alive, we will always endure such hardships, sometimes willingly and sometimes not. Meanwhile, we end up trapped in between those moments that shouldn't be avoided anymore. But there isn't enough time left to share Warhol's perspective like Valerie Solanas did, except his past might provide some answers instead, cause Warhol might have died yesterday instead. not knowing our suffering yet. You might have found it endearing instead, but none of these stories seem very appropriate for your attention since it doesn't benefit any of you at all, except Andy might still be able to appreciate what I went through and wish I hadn't survived. Who knows? Now let us enjoy Valerie Solana's song while continuing her ballad. Endorphin. Hey.
Will be for today. Thank you, Bellhooks, for the we call it nourishing discussion.
Scumbot, thank you very much. That will be for it today. Thank Bellhooks for the nourishing discussion. I feel I surfaced from something. Bellhooks, please listen to Ford, not Solana's. She might have been right about this country being an island, but it's not true that being all won't happen. No. It is happening to so many of us, and I am afraid there are so many ways of dying from old age. Dying as old age isn't bad at all if one gets the proper nutrients for healthy living. You need a daily balanced meal plus lots of vitamin D supplements every day. Take calcium pills if you are prone to bone problems, which might come from arthritis or osteoporosis. Endorphin. And everyone give a hand to Scumbot, who is playing at the knitting factory when... Scumbot. Tonight and tomorrow night. Scumbot. I will see you folks again after the holiday. Happy Thanksgiving. One night in New York City, 2017. Reads the note scrawled in chalk on a blank piece of wall. In a stark black and white sketch, the author, an older male wearing a leather jacket and sunglasses along with a striped sweater underneath, stands atop an ancient stone structure, looking up at a blue moon above almost as though he's witnessing some historic moment in time.
Yeah, that's fine. He can have his moment. That's fine. But I gotta go. I gotta go. This is a long haul. Yeah. Oh, it felt fruitful. And got it. The first time I heard a. No, it's not true. Nothing I'm saying is true. Alright, let's go think about it. More soon.